Thanks everybody for joining us. My name is Heather Farrington. I'm the zoology curator at the Cincinnati Museum Center. I'm going to give it just a couple more seconds to see if we have any latecomers. I have to make sure everyone's able to get into the meeting okay. But I want to talk today a little bit about my role at the museum, or actually there's multiple roles. So I basically consider my job to have three main components. The first is taking care of the preserved animal collections. The second is running the genetics lab at the museum. And the third is taking care of the live animal collection that we have at the museum. And as we go through, I'm gonna start with a short talk. Those of you who are joining us on video, you'll be able to see a few pictures as I flip through to give you something to look at and give you a little bit of a virtual tour of the collections and some of the things I'm talking about. But if you're joining us just by phone, that shouldn't be a problem. You should be able to get a pretty vivid image of the things that I do just by listening. All right, so I'm going to attempt to share my screen. And does everyone see my pictures here?
Yep.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. So there's actually a second building to the museum center that the public typically don't know about or don't see very often, and it's the Geyer Center, which is actually down the street from Union Terminal. And that's where we keep all of our scientific collections. And we also have, most of the curators have offices there as well. So this is actually a photo of the Geyer Center. The statues out front actually used to be in front of the Gilbert Avenue Museum, if any of you remember visiting that as a child. I was never able to see the Gilbert Avenue Museum, but I'm told that these guys look pretty impressive sitting out front of the museum. So as I mentioned, one of my roles is to take care of the preserved animal collections. If you go to a really large museum like the Smithsonian or the Field Museum, you would probably find that there's multiple curators in each area, or maybe a single curator for each particular collection. In our facility, it's just myself and my collections manager, Emily Imhoff. So we go, oops, sorry, I'm getting little pop-ups telling me there's people waiting. So basically what we do is care for all of these different collections. So I just want to go through them a little bit in turn. Apologies, I'm trying to figure out. All right, sorry, I'm having technical difficulties. Try this again. Okay. So the different preserved collections that we have are the ornithology collection, which is the birds. And typically those are taxidermy mounts that are posed very lifelike. Sometimes they're in flight, sometimes they're just standing. Sometimes they're mounted on very realistic looking branches and tree trunks, that sort of thing. And they take up a lot of space. They're very hard to pack in an efficient manner. So most of the taxidermy mounts are stored on shelving. The other method of preparation that we use is study skins, which is just putting the bird on its back, wings folded, very compact, so that we can fit a lot of individual specimens in a small space. In this case, it's cabinetry with metal drawers where we can line all of the specimens up by species. Another collection that we have is mammals, and it's a very similar situation. We have taxidermy mounts as well as study skins. And these two collections are considered dry collections. So they're collections that are stored in dry, cool conditions. But we also have fluid collections. And these are specimens that are typically stored whole in alcohol or formalin, which is diluted formaldehyde. And the fluid collection is kind of unique. It has a lot of special care requirements. We need to always make sure that the fluid levels in the jars are high enough. We need to make sure that the concentrations of the chemicals in the jars are appropriate. If you can see in these pictures, one of the other things that we do is this is a lot of flammable liquid and a lot of liquid that you don't really want to be inhaling the vapors from. So we want to make sure that nothing gets broken, nothing gets knocked off shelving. So the shelving is actually installed upside down so that there's a little lip on the edge of the shelf so that if you're trying to grab a jar off of the shelf, it's not going to slide off. We also have things like spark-free lighting. In the main collections area, there's no power outlets, so you're not plugging anything in that might spark. We have special spill kits. If someone would drop a jar and break it, we can clean up the chemicals. We also have special fire extinguishers, all kinds of special precautions for working in that room, just because of all of the flammable liquid and the liquids that you don't really want to be exposed to over the long term. Also in the fluid collection, we have our fish collection. So I should have said the fluid collection is primarily reptiles and amphibians, but we also have fish. And most of our fish are preserved in fluid, but we do have a small fish collection that is preserved dry up in the dry collection storage area. We also have malacology in the dry collection. That's our shell collection. And this includes anything from freshwater mussels to land and marine snails to marine scallops and clams, all kinds of things. Anything with a shell is going to be in the malacology collection. We have a worldwide collection, all kinds of interesting critters in there. Most of these, we have hundreds and hundreds of thousands of shells in the malacology collection. A lot of those are actually cataloged as lots. So instead of cataloging every individual shell, we might catalog a particular set of shells that was collected at a particular time and place that are all of the same species. So we might have a lot of 10 shells that were collected at a particular time and place of the same species. So thankfully, we don't have to catalog every single one of those shells. That could be a pretty big job. We also have our entomology collection. This includes everything from flies, bees, beetles, butterflies, and moths. Most of these insects are going to be pinned, as you can see in these photos here. And this is a pretty large collection as well, and we're doing a lot of work to update it and organize it and get everything cataloged.
Hey, Heather, we can't see your screen anymore.
Oh no! How long's that been going on?
I think for a few minutes, I think.
Okay, let me try this again. Okay, how about now?
We're good.
Yay, all right. Sorry about that. So you guys probably missed a few pictures. I'll just go back very quickly. So this was our fluid collection, the fish collection. There's some malacology photos, entomology. And then we also have an other invertebrates area. And this is these are things that just don't quite fit into malacology or entomology. So these would be things like corals, sponges, sea urchins, starfish, those types of things. So a lot of marine critters, but we also have a lot of crayfish coming into the collection right now. Our collections manager, Emily, is a crayfish researcher. So she's also bringing in crayfish into the collection. And just for fun, I also have a small herbarium collection that I manage. So this isn't part of the animal kingdom, but it resides in my collections area. The herbarium actually is just a single season of collection in the Philippines from a previous curator who did work there. So it's not a very big collection and it doesn't have much in the way of local plant life. So I mentioned taxidermy skins, study skins. I mentioned some of the ways that we preserve these animals, but we also have lots of other materials available in these collections. Oh, hang on, I got more folks joining us. There we go. Okay, you guys can still see my screen, right? Okay. So we also have quite a bit of skeletal material. So we have skeletons of mammals, birds, the reptiles and amphibians, all kinds of different things. We also have lots of furs and pelts. But one of the most accessed collections is actually our frozen tissue collection. So genetics has really taken off as a tool for taxonomists to try and identify species and how they're related to one another. So any animals that come into the collection now have a tissue sample collected for potential genetic analysis. So a researcher can reach out to us and say, I'm interested in doing a genetic study on local salamanders. I need tissue samples to run some genetic analysis, and they can contact us. We can get into the freezer and retrieve that material and give them a subsample of the tissue that we collected when we preserve those animals. So that's a very popular collection right now. We also have what I call assorted critter parts. We have things like individual feathers, wings. We have feet and beaks of birds so that you can look at the different adaptations these animals have for their different ways of life. So if you think about a duck's feet versus a hawk's feet versus a woodpecker's foot, so you can actually line all of these up and look at how certain anatomical characteristics are suited for the way of life for a particular animal. So those are really useful for the education collection. And we also have a good assortment of horns and antlers that we can use to talk about the differences between the two and some of the crazy shapes that they take in some of these African mammals. Let's see, there we go. So most of the collections in the dry collections area are stored in these metal cabinets, and we have them on a carriage system, a compact storage system that slides along the rails, so you open up whatever aisle you need at a particular time. So what do we do in the collections? As I mentioned, we're always preparing specimens. Most of our specimens come in from salvage, which means things like a bird that's hit a window or an animal that's been hit alongside the road. We also get a lot of our specimens from rehabbers in the area that are given injured animals that have to be euthanized if they can't be treated and released. We also get a lot of specimens from places like the zoo and the aquarium for some of our more exotic specimens. But as those specimens come in, everything needs to be prepared, cataloged, labeled, organized, filed. So there's a lot of work that goes into preparing a specimen and incorporating it into the existing collection. And once the specimens are in the collection, we're constantly looking for pest activity. So one of the biggest enemies of a dry collection is beetles or moths that might go after our taxidermy mounts or our study skins. In the fluid collection, we're constantly looking at fluid levels in the jars, making sure that no jars are cracked, making sure that everything is the way it should be in those areas. And there's always lots of cleaning and whatnot to do. The other thing that we do in the collections is processing loans. So individuals or universities might contact us and say, I'm really interested in borrowing a particular set of specimens for anything from art classes. We have a lot of artists who use our taxidermy mounts as models for their classes. Up to people doing research on morphology. We just had a researcher at the University of Louisville borrow a bunch of Cooper's hawks to look at plumage coloration, so coloration in the feathers. So we're constantly processing loans to go out of the facility as well as receiving loans back in that have been loaned out. So my second duty, I guess, at the museum is running the DNA lab. So the DNA lab's actually been at the museum for about, 12 years or so. But it's just recently been moved to Union Terminal from the Geyer Center. So now when visitors come to the museum, they can actually look through the glass walls and see us working on various projects. So running the DNA lab involves making sure all the machines are up and running properly, making sure we're doing routine maintenance on them, stocking and ordering supplies, coming up with new projects, writing grants, making collaborations for new projects with outside researchers, also performing the lab work, interpreting results, mentoring students, all kinds of different things. And then ultimately what we're trying to do is get our results published so that we're actually contributing to the scientific literature. And the last thing that I do is supervise the live animal collection. So if you've been to the Museum Center, you probably have seen a lot of our animals on exhibit. One of the most unique animal collections that we have are our live bats that we use in our bat flight program every day when the museum's up and running. But we have lots of reptiles and amphibians, our bats, we have lots of frogs, toads, snakes, turtles, and you can visit a lot of those guys during live animal demonstrations at the museum, but they also go out into the community to schools and community organizations. So as you can imagine, there's never a dull moment what's going on in zoology. I try to divide up my time between all three of these areas. And it's never the same day twice. Whenever I come in the morning, I might have a plan, but it typically gets derailed pretty quickly as things happen. And I get a phone call saying, hey, I had a woodpecker hit my window. Can I come drop it off? And then we end up giving a short impromptu tour of the collections to someone who's donating to us. So it's a lot of fun. We do a lot of crazy stuff. But that gives you kind of an idea what my functions are at the museum, but there are other things. If you're familiar with the museum situation right now, we're working on opening new galleries after our 2.5-year renovation that we just came out of. So working on developing new exhibits, working on selecting items from the collection to put in those displays and exhibits. So I guess it's kind of other duties as assigned. So with that, if anybody has any questions, I would be happy to answer those.
I don't know if you covered this, but when did Cincinnati first start having a zoology curator?
So the very, very first zoology curator at the Museum Center was actually Audubon of bird fame. So that's some big shoes for me to fill. And that was 200 years ago. So we've actually been working on building our zoology collection for the last 2 centuries. So that's pretty impressive.
Yeah. Did you guys get the animatronic Audubon from the parks? Have you ever seen that? Oh, Great Parks had an animatronic Audubon.
Oh, wow. We have to look into that.
We had the real thing, so.
Oh. Any other questions?
Heather, what was the story on that bear in your image there?
The bear, oh, the big rug at the.
Yeah.
So the museum actually has, so we accumulate a lot of strange things from private collections. And at some time in history, it was kind of the in thing to have animal skin rugs. So we actually have lots of animal skin rugs in the collection that have been donated over the years. And that particular photo, we were trying to figure out the best way to fold a bearskin rug. So during our renovations, when we were trying to clean up the collections areas to have our compact storage installed, we were pulling out all of this crazy stuff from the collections, and we were trying to figure out how best to store something that big and bulky and awkward. So. Anything else? You guys are so quiet.
Heather, what is your favorite part about your job?
Probably the variety. I mean, sometimes it's overwhelming to have so many things going on and trying to juggle all that. But I think I would get really bored if I were just doing the same thing day after day. And it really does, it suits my curiosity. You know, every time I walk into the zoology prep lab and I see somebody preparing a species I've never seen before, you know, like if I see somebody working on a bobcat or somebody working on a penguin, you know, I always stop and go, oh my gosh, wow, look at this. And it's just amazing to see these animals up close and see the special adaptations that they have for their way of life. So I just am totally fascinated every time I walk into the room and see something new and something interesting and, you know, something I never noticed before, because how often do you see a bobcat up close where you can actually touch it, or a penguin that you can actually hold and see, you know, how thick the feathers are and the amazing skin structure it has because of all that insulating that it needs to have for those Arctic conditions that it lives in. So yeah, I think it's just the variety and just constantly learning something new every day.
Do you have a favorite specimen?
I do. So my favorite bird is the resplendent quetzal. It's a little white, green, and red bird from Central America that has a really, really, really long green tail. Absolutely beautiful. I've been to Costa Rica twice and I still have not seen one in person. It irritates me, but we have a few in the collection. And so every time we do a tour, I always pull that guy out and say, this is my favorite. So, but there are so many amazing things in the collection. We have so many neat things in that storage area that, and I'm still learning what we have. I mean, every time my collections manager gives a tour, she'll pull something out I've never seen. Like, where did that come from? So there's always something new coming up.
Do you have maybe things about your job that you like less than other things?
Yeah, like I said, it's overwhelming at times having so much going on. Trying to think. I don't know. I mean, like everyone else, I get tired of computer work and that kind of stuff. So, you know, sitting and cataloging is kind of boring, but that's a really important part of what we do, to get all that information digitized and online and available for the public. But yeah, I think probably the worst thing is just trying to juggle so many things and trying to do everything well, and not let anything fall through the cracks. And you just do the best you can. Anything else?
How do you decide what, can you hear me?
Yep, I can.
How do you decide if people are donating things, if you're going to take them or not, or if you have multiple, if whatever they have is redundant to what you have? Do you pick and choose, or do you ever get rid of anything, or just keep acquiring?
Occasionally we do get rid of things, or somebody will contact us and say, oh, a robin hit my window. So some of the really, really common species, I mean, redundancy is actually a good thing in museum collections, because you want to see the diversity, not only among individuals, but among species, among ages, among sexes. So it's good to have a lot of different specimens for a particular species. But some of them, some of the really common birds and mammals in the area, we do get pretty inundated with. So if someone calls me and says, hey, a robin hit my window, do you want it? I might say, well, let's not bother having you make a trip to the museum to donate that. But if someone calls me and says, hey, a pileated woodpecker ran into my window, I am all over that, because it's something that we don't get in that often. And migratory birds, this is the season that the spring migrants are going to be moving through. We always are interested in the spring migrants, because those are things that are seasonal, and it's good to have a record of when and where these birds were moving through the area. If they happen to strike a building or hit a window, or someone finds them when they're out hiking. So we do make some calls. Typically, if we get something in that we're not super excited about, we'll actually prepare it for the education collection, because our educators use a lot of this material in programming. And if these specimens are meant to be handled and meant to be passed around classrooms and whatnot, they don't last very long. So we like to have common species that not only are classrooms going to be familiar with those species from their own yards or from their own areas, but we also, those are nice birds to use in education that we know they're going to get, you know, damaged over time. We know they're going to get worn out and have to be replaced. So that's typically what we do with things that we don't want to put into the research collection. Another decision that we have to make is sometimes people bring us things that are a little bit too far gone. If things have been laying outside for a day or two, they might have insects on them, they might start to rot. In some of those cases, we'll have someone bring it in, and if it's a little too far gone, we'll salvage what we can. So we might take a wing, or we might take a tissue sample, but we won't prepare the whole skin. And another decision that I have to make when we receive animals is what gets prepared as a study skin and what gets prepared as a taxidermy mount. So sometimes, especially right now, as we're working on developing these new exhibits at the museum, I have to think ahead and think, oh wow, somebody just brought me a great blue heron. Is this something that we might want to put in an exhibit on display, or is this something that we just want to prepare as a scientific study skin and keep it in the collection? So that's something else that I've had to deal with recently, is trying to make those calls. What could we use for taxidermy versus preparing as a study skin? So there's lots of decisions that go into whether we take something at all, and if we do take it, what do we save from it? And then how do we preserve it as a taxidermy mount or a study skin? So there's a whole series of decisions. I don't always make the right ones, unfortunately, because sometimes we prepare a study skin and I think, oh, I wish I would have had that taxidermy. That would have been an awesome, you know, addition to this particular exhibit or display. But I do the best I can with the information I have, and thinking about the projects that might be coming down the road. Anything else?
Heather, what kind of things can we do to help the bird populations and the wild animals in our area?
So, oh gosh, there's such a list. So during migration season, we have a program in Cincinnati called Lights Out Cincinnati. So a lot of these migratory birds actually make their moves during the nighttime hours, and city lights and house lights are very distracting for migratory birds that are trying to use starlight and moonlight to navigate. So we see a lot of areas, particularly urban areas that have lots of ambient light. We see a lot of window strikes and things as birds are moving through. So turning off your lights at night during migration season is helpful. Planting native plants in your yard, so things that the birds can actually utilize as they're traveling for food sources and for shelter. Lawns are bad as far as I'm concerned. So if you put, you know, gardens and trees in your yard, that's habitat for all kinds of animals, not just ones that are moving through seasonally. And of course, support your local parks and green spaces, environmental organizations that are constantly trying to preserve areas in their natural states. So there's lots that you can do. And then of course, you can put out bird feeders and things to help supplement food sources for birds that are moving around or trying to breed or feed their young. So there's all kinds of different things that you can do to help local wildlife.
Thank you. That's a good.
Yeah. Any others? No? All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. If you want to look up more activities and information about the Museum Center, please check out our website at cincymuseum.org. And because our Museum Center is closed right now, We have limited revenue coming in, so if you feel like donating to the cause, that would be wonderful, or renewing your membership. So there's all kinds of ways to support our organization during our closure. So if you want to check out our website, we would really appreciate your help. So thanks so much for joining us today.